Guest judges on Drag Race have been a staple since season 1, and I'm honestly glad that we get them each and every week. There's a lot of fun watching the promos and seeing who's going to be on the season as a guest judge and then speculating how they're going to do. It's been a staple for so long for a couple different reasons. For one, there's the chance that these judges bring in their fans into the show. Sometimes they post on social media and then their fans are like, oh, what is this drag queen show? I know a pretty decent amount of people who were brought into Drag Race because they were standing a certain celebrity and that celebrity guest judged on the show. Another reason is that they're bringing a pretty objective view of the queens into the show, and most often specialize in the type of the challenge the queens are tasked to do. Rue, Michelle, Carson, and Ross have been with these queens each week and seen them improve or seen them falter, and they're more likely to give them a special treatment or another chance because they know what they've done the previous weeks. But with judges who just come in, what you see is the truth. So sometimes a bad week for a frontrunner can be doubly bad if a guest judge goes in really hard on them. And I do think the objectiveness that the guest judges bring in is really good sometimes because sometimes the queens have a mist over the regular judges. But then other times the guest judges can be a little off base and kind of make critiques that make no sense in the grand scheme of things. At their best, they can provide some insanely great insight and inspire the queens or just be insanely entertaining, and at their worst, they can be silent or make comments that rub the queens and the fans the wrong way. And that's what I want to talk about today, so let's get into the best and worst of guest judges right after our sponsor.
Yeah!
This video is sponsored by Adam and Eve. Now, over here on the JackFed channel, we are sex positive, and I'm so glad that I'm being sponsored by this company. They are one of the best providers of a wide variety of sex toys that I know you're gonna love. They have 24-hour customer service and a 90-day no-hassle return policy. Everything is shipped very discreetly, which shows they have comfort and care in mind for their customers, and it makes sense because they've been in business for over 50 years. And on top of that, 20% of their profit goes to fight against the spread of HIV around the world. It's just a great company. So if you're interested, you could use my code JackFed in order to get 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. The link is in the description. It also works for Adam Mail too. You guys should definitely check it out because I know you're going to enjoy it. Thanks again, Adam and Eve. Now let's get back to the video. With the move to VH1, the guest judges in the premiere started to get amazing. Gaga, Christina, Miley, Nicki, Robin, Lizzo, and Alicia, these are top tier. And they were even more amazing because they were given the screen time to be amazing. A lot of the time with some guest judges, they gotta cut the critiques because it's only an hour-long show at most, but when they have people on at the caliber of these amazing women, they're gonna use them as much as possible. What helps is that most of the time during these premieres, aside from seasons 10 and 11, these queens don't get eliminated in the first episode, which allows the judges to give mostly positive critiques, and that leaves a better impression in the viewer's mind. The insight of Gaga and Nicki, the class of Robin and Christina, the heart of Lizzo and Alicia, and of course the fun of Miley. Every single one of these superstars brought something unique to the table, and I'm so glad that they wanted to be there. And aside from Robin, who was unfortunately shafted a little bit in the entrance department, all of them got extremely fun entrances and really surprised the queens. If I did have to choose between all these women, of course I would go with Gaga. I think she had one of the best portrayals on the show, and the whole episode was basically dedicated to her. She was out there taking notes for each queen to circle back and give them the critiques even if she couldn't give them on the stage, and seeing that appreciation on her face every single time someone walked out, it was perfect. Miley also has a special place in my heart because I grew up watching her on TV, and seeing her be such a big fan of the show is so reassuring to me and my generation. The premiere guest judges are one outlet the show can't really screw up, and I think it's just perfect because it's great for Emmys, it's great for viewership, and overall it just helps the start of the season to make it feel monumental. Also, I'm so close to 50k subscribers, so if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. Only a small portion of you guys are, and I will give the biggest kiss to you if you do. Speaking of Disney stars and Miley Cyrus, let's talk about some judges that weren't as great with All Stars 2 and All Stars 3, Raven Symone and Vanessa Hudgens. We're going to be starting out small with the negativity. I don't really think these two were that bad, but a lot of people were commenting about them, and I do understand why. Raven half the time was extremely fun and really charismatic. It's the Raven that I know, but the other half of the time she kind of took a note out of Michelle's book and was a little harsh with the critiques. It's so hard to go back and watch these critiques because Michelle was just kind of being mean to be mean, and Raven was emulating that a little too much. But I don't really blame Raven that much because she was just going off of what Michelle was giving her, and then it just turned out bad in the eyes of the fans. Hey, this is Jack in editing. I actually want to make an update on Raven Symone, who was not very good to adore. I talked about how Raven was matching the energy of Michelle, and that's why her critiques came off a little harsher, but some of the critiques that were said to Adore by Raven were before Michelle even started talking, and those are the critiques that really made Adore want to quit. Adore said that Raven made a comment that touched home and made her want to quit because she was super sensitive and super super mad about it. So at the beginning of this little section, I said, oh, these two aren't really that bad, but if there is a guest judge that makes a queen want to quit because of a comment they made, they are one of the worst, and I really hope this never happens again. And again, I don't think McHale's comments were good at all, but the fact that she took majority of the blame and the heat from the fans because the show showcased it like that, it's also really sad to hear about. If you're judging a group of people, you need to be constructive. It's not your chance to tear people down in order to make yourself feel better. But still, please don't send hate to Raven at all. This situation is super old. I'm just talking about it now. Vanessa Hudgens was really nice, and she was really into voguing at that time. Her appearance again wasn't really that bad, but she represents a lot of the time when guest judges go on and know a couple queer things and then reference those. It feels like she watched Aja's performance, saw the voguing routine, and was like, oh, I need to comment on this because I know what voguing is.
I'm so into voguing right now, so that gave me life.
These two are far from being the worst, so we'll get to those in a little bit. Moving back over to the best, it's cheating a little bit, but I do want to talk about the last group of judges before we get into individual people. The season 13 rotating panel of T.S. Madison, Lonnie Love, and Nicole Byer were all so fun. They slid right into those roles as if they've always been there, and I'd love to see them come back again. It was cool because at the beginning they were able to give their objective opinions of the queens because they were there for just that one episode, and then they came back and saw how the queens grew later on. So you get a little bit of both, but because they weren't there the whole time, you still got the full honesty of these judges. And they are just warm people. Nicole Byer especially, I want to be friends with her so bad. And then we move into an interesting territory of judges that are bad because they just really didn't do anything. Miles Heiser was on season 10 and he says that he's a pretty big fan of the show, and yet we really didn't get that much from him. It may be the product of a bad edit, or knowing his personality, he's just a little more pulled back, and I just don't think that's the best for a guest judge on the show. For a show that's non-stop cracking jokes, he just didn't really match the energy of the panel who were constantly laughing. And that's okay, again, he's more of a reserved person, but if you're not really laughing at the jokes along with the panel, it looks like you don't want to be there. Another judge from the same season that's been hyped up forever was Shania Twain, and she gave us nothing. It was just so insanely clear she was only there to promote her album, which sucks because a lot of people consider her a gay icon. And then we get to the moment of Cameron thanking her for inspiring her to become a drag queen, and this is all she said.
And you are probably one of the reasons that I am here today as a drag queen.
Well, thank you. The pleasure's mine.
But of course, the most infamous guest judges who did so little on the show that it made RuPaul almost walk out were Chanel Iman and Gigi Hadid. Chanel and Gigi have talents in modeling that not a lot of people can pull off, but they can't really pull off comedy. I do understand why these two may not have been the funniest. I don't think their sense of humor is great overall, but I don't think they were properly prepped by the producers to understand what Snatch Game was. At most, I feel like they were told, okay, give an answer, and then the queens are gonna give you an answer and they have to make it funny. But I feel like there was the lack of telling these two girls that they needed to be funny too. And they don't even need to be laugh out loud hilarious like Raven or Jujubee. They just need to provide some sort of joke or charisma, and they just didn't really give that, and Of course, this is still one of my favorite episodes of the show because of Naomi's arc and Bob dominating the challenge, but whenever I go back and think about this, I don't think about these two. Chanel, Gigi, and Miles can all consider themselves fans of the show, but sometimes fans and their celebrity status just don't mix with a good guest judge. But if we want to talk about riffing and comedy and giving the most, let's talk about Joel McHale and Tiffany Pollard from season 11. I know there is a small subgroup of people who despise Joel McHale for his appearance on the show, but hear me out. It was very clear there was no disrespect behind Joel McHale shouting on the show. They would have definitely stopped him if it was actually a problem. Rue was even mildly entertained by it, and of course it was to annoy Michelle, and that was just TV gold. And yeah, you can say Michelle was annoyed, but it feels like they're old friends, and I would love to see him back. If we're gonna get a straight male on the show, we should get someone like Joel McHale who is constantly being entertaining and being entertained because he genuinely likes the show. He's been covering it forever on his various platforms and knows a lot more about it than you think, and honestly, him being on the show was just a matter of time. But he wasn't just there to scream and cause a ruckus, he gave some really great critiques too. And then we get to the other side of the table with Tiffany Pollard, and these two together, so fun. I really do think that Joel McHale stole the show, but Tiffany was so funny when you watch it back. She was not being overshadowed at all. She had so many great jokes and so many great critiques, and these two are the perfect example of how you match the energy of the judging panel.
What's your background? Are you Norwegian?
I'm Swedish, actually. I'm Swedish and
okay.
French.
Is that near Norwegian?
Yeah, it's Scandinavia. It's up there.
Okay.
I get that you have the Norwegia bone structure, but
They had great critiques, they had their own little charm and their own little characterization, and walked away being super memorable. I think there are two guest judges that are most widely talked about being the worst, and let's start off with Aubry ODay. There were a lot of people who said Aubry in my community post, and I do understand why. I feel like a lot of her comments just came off as mean. It feels like almost every single negative critique that she said was aired, and none of them really came off as constructive. It was all just kind of tearing the queens down. And that's just really not the best way to judge the queens, and it came off as super disrespectful. And she was there for a decent portion of the episode. She was there for the filming process, and they do that with some guest judges, but not all of them, which I find pretty interesting. And again, during filming, she was there to give them insight, but it kind of came off as disrespectful, and it seemed like she didn't really get a lot of the queens' infomercials. Jinx's ad is one of the most funny, iconic, referential commercials in the entire franchise, and it was almost kind of sort of shot down by Aubry. Not actually completely, but it was clear Jinx had a vision that was comedic, and they didn't really want to go with it. Overall, there just wasn't really a lot of constructive criticism, and it felt like she was working against the queens instead of with them. Let's jump across the pond for the last couple best entries, starting with a quick side note of Drag Race France. Jean-Paul Gaultier was on Drag Race France, and he had so much insight about the outfits the queens were wearing, just like Lady Gaga. I love when Drag Race pays tribute to someone, and it's even cooler when they're sitting in the room and can give us the tea. It really set the stage for Drag Race France, and I think it was one of the best choices they could have made. And for the final two, let's talk about the UK with Andrew Garfield and Alicia Dixon. Let's talk about Andrew Garfield first. Coming onto the panel of a premiere of a new show and killing it like this is so hard to do. He gave some of the best critiques, was in on all of the jokes, and it was very clear that he is such a big fan of the show. And it's very clear the way he talks to everyone, he is such a nice person. He was doing the compliment sandwich, starting off with a compliment and then getting to the critique and then giving them another compliment at the end. It was the perfect introduction for these queens into this show, and I really want him back so bad. Take everything I said about Andrew Garfield and then apply it to Alicia Dixon, who was also just having the time of her life. From the jump, it really seemed like she cared for these queens and wanted to make that known even if she was giving a negative critique. And the scandalous lip sync was already so great, but it made it 10 times better because Alicia was on her feet dancing with them. The UK said that she was one of the best guest judges, and I really can't disagree with them. She's one of the greatest of all time. And then we get to the worst. Jeffrey Moran feels like a nepotism guest judge. I understand why he was on Absolute Vodka and all that, being the CEO of that company, but because he's the CEO, he's basically just a businessman, and that just doesn't fit at all. For someone who was on constantly in the early seasons and was basically sponsoring the show, it felt like he never got it. He made multiple comments over the course of his time on the show, basically saying, "Oh, I wouldn't take you to a job interview looking like that."
If I pick her up, we're going to an interview, and I see that, I'm like, what? You gotta cover those up.
This is a drag competition show, not a job interview. There was just always this air of him being like, "Oh, I'm judging you, that must mean I'm better than you," when he really did not know drag whatsoever. The way he said things, the critiques he made, it was just so disrespectful towards the queens, and I'm glad they parted ties with him. His best appearance in the show was the RuPaul roast, and that's only because he didn't really say anything. I really do not like being negative, but I really just didn't think that he fit, but it felt like he had such a stranglehold on the show because he was sponsoring them. It's not all about business, it should be a fun reality show, and you should judge accordingly. No hate to him, I hope he's doing better. Absolute Vodka is probably doing just alright, so let me wrap this up. Guest judges on Drag Race, at their most inoffensive, are middle of the road, and they're just nice, and they're there to give critiques that apply most of the time. A decent portion of the guest judges do go above and beyond and be super entertaining, give great critiques, and match the vibe of the panel. It's easy to stay neutral, it's easier to be seen as bad, but it's hard to be seen as great. So we have to commend those great guest judges because they're there to give critiques, and when they do it flawlessly, it helps the queens so much. And those who were bad, maybe they were having an off day, maybe guest judging just isn't for them, they're out the next week, so let's not dwell on it too much, even though I made a full video about it just now. Awkward. At least the hilarious Ross Matthews is on every other week. Once again, thank you to Adam and Eve for sponsoring this video. You can use my code JackFed for 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. Links in the description to check it out, and I will see you soon with another video.